Just because the new house is smaller doesn't necessarily mean that the cost is cheaper. Downsizing is one of those things that a lot of people talk about. Sometimes they talk about it in space, they talk about it in service issues that are required, but most of the time we really don't see the financial issues change, just the place that people happen to live. Join us today on Consider This Program. We'll talk about downsizing and things you may want to consider. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This Program. I am your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Daren Hardesty.
And we are happy to have you along. Hope you're enjoying the day and having a wonderful week. Daren, it is so good to have you on the show. He is one of our associate advisors. I get to wear the badge of joining the financial services industry 2 weeks before the crash in 1987. I thought I was big, bold, and brash. Daren did it in COVID. So nothing like leaving a public educator position and joining the ranks of a fast-paced, moving in a crazy world of finance.
Yeah, the risk was a little bit different there.
Yeah,
But
you didn't know, actually. In all fairness, you made that decision in January, and here we got here, and it's worked out well, and we are just pleased to have you. So, you know nothing about empty nesting as an individual, other than what you're watching with your parents and grandparents. But you do have 3 young kids, and I know that you do dream some days about being an empty nester.
Yes.
Don't wish it away too quickly.
Yes, right.
But let's talk about this. What are some of the causes, the root issues that drive people to become empty nesters or to make changes simply because they are empty nesters?
Yeah, you work your whole life and you build a home, and I always think of it as, my wife and I were thinking of our dream home, or thinking of our forever home. A lot of people consider, and they want to have a home where they can raise their kids and you can have plenty of room and plenty of room in the yard, and you have all this big space. And then the kids leave. And so when the kids leave and you have all this space, now you have all this space and all this yard and not a lot of, energy or, desire to want to take care of those things, or a lot of help to take care of those things. So I think it's a natural thing where they think, what, I don't need this, but I can still have something that is mine, something that's fits our needs now. And so downsizing to a smaller space or a smaller yard, things like that make a lot of sense for people.
That sounds great on paper.
Absolutely.
I have done this for 33 years, so I can tell you it doesn't always work as planned. So I'm going to ask one of the obvious questions. Does having a smaller house or smaller location, or moving to a condo or moving to a different location, does that translate directly to savings?
No.
And why is that?
Well, people are used to a standard of living. And whether you're in a big house or a small house, somehow I think most people are going to end up living at that same standard of living. It's always an ideal thought that, when I retire, or when I, have, more time, or I'm just going to spend less. You get used to, certain fixed expenses that you want to maintain. And whether you're in a big house or a small house, you're probably still going to meet a lot of those things.
Yeah. So, one of my favorite pastors, obviously Steve Poe is our pastor at Northview, and Nate here in the Anderson campus that I go to. But Andy Stanley, Charles Stanley's son, is at North Point down in Atlanta. And I always listen to his sermons. And one of the things that he talks about are comfy couches, right? And so when you go to downsize, you need to recognize my 24-year-old daughter just this week explained to my wife again how disappointed was that we sold her childhood home when Barb and I, quote unquote, downsized, as empty nesters and moved to a new location.
Yeah.
Right. Andy talks about comfy couches. When you bought the couch, it was for a functional purpose of being able to sit there, watch TV, share family time, read books, open Christmas presents, etc. But as the years go by, you're going to remember the first time that you held your daughter. Right. You're going to remember the first time that, the prom date came over and you set him down on the couch and explained to him, right, the facts of life. You're going to remember these things. And as long as you're in that house, you're not going to replace that couch as often as you might believe. Right. My mother used to get so upset with us in the old house when I left, hand to heart. Right. When we left, the couch that I owned, my dad bought when I was a junior in high school, and Barb and I still had it, been reupholstered a few times, but it was that comfy couch. I remembered, the first time Barb came to meet my parents and being on that house, right?
Yeah.
We've been married for 33 years. So those things happen. Folks, when you move to a new house, right, it may be a smaller home, But the bottom line is the old couch doesn't make the move.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, and you'd be amazed what some of this furniture can really cost. That's one of it. One of the other issues, though, that really comes to it, as you find out the value of your house, it's kind of like, wow. I remember paying $50,000 for the house and selling it for $200,000, right? Well, the problem is everything else appreciated along with it.
Yeah.
And so it's great to hear about rising real estate prices. If you're a seller and you don't have to repurchase, but if you do, it's a whole nother story. Now, let's talk about this. So let's say I've got my house paid for. I don't, not at 2.5% interest. They can pay it off when the mortgage runs out. And believe me, if it's a 2.5, I will refinance it again then. But here we are. So let's say the house is paid for. That's typically what happens when people come to see us and they're just getting ready to think about retiring. What should they do in terms of downsizing, of selling their house and buying another? What are some of the things that they need to consider?
Well, if you're downsizing, they may be moving into a condominium. They might be moving into a situation where there might be some expenses that they haven't had to pay before. So that'd be the big one for me, is just make sure that what it's going to cost to take care of that lawn, or to take care of all the other things that you don't want to have to do anymore. The fees that have come in, that when you're living in an area that is downsized, but at the same time there's going to be some expenses that you haven't had to pay before.
So those are called carry costs, by the way, that upkeep that's required. So when you're in a condo, typically you have a homeowners association fee or something of that nature to take care of the snow removal and everything else. You really do need to understand, especially if you're on a fixed budget, what some of that inflationary pressure is, how much it can raise. And I've had people move into places where they've said, Joe, the homeowners association fee is so low. And I'm going, listen, you are part of that association. When they go bankrupt, right, you still have a problem.
Yeah.
And, so this is not a matter of getting away with the least amount possible. It's a matter of having one that's very, very secure. So when you're moving into one of those areas, you really do want to see the financials and make sure that they're well endowed, if you will, to be able to battle storms or major repairs from the entertainment center, things of that nature.
Right. Location matters too. If you are downsizing, some people might downsize to Florida, or they might downsize into a new county. And so there may be different taxation things that you have to take into account to make sure that you're aware. If you're moving from where we're at, Madison County, to, let's say, Hamilton County, there's different taxations and different, I wouldn't call it inflation, but just the standard of living or the cost of living in each county is completely different. So it might have to add on a little bit of those expenses.
It varies by whether you're in city,
right?
Whether you're in a county and which county, and then it varies by state. So what you pay on your federal tax rate doesn't change regardless of which of the states you live in.
Right.
But it very much does the municipality and the state that you live in. So very, 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 very fair question. But when you're looking at this downsizing and you're going to buy another place, I've spent a lot of time over my 33-year career reminding people, you don't build a home or buy a home until you have the other one sold, because you never know how long that thing is going to take to get sold, right? So I look at the national average today, and you can't bank on this, but the house across the street from my house took 18 months to sell, right? But the average house in the United States as of May of 2021 is on the market for 17 days. Some are closing, and that's where you get into trouble with averages. Some are closing the day that they go on the market.
Yeah.
Some before they go on the market. Realtor doesn't put a sign, calls his buddy. His buddy comes and buys the house. Bada boom, bada bing, and it's all over.
Yeah.
And you've got 30 days to get out of the house, right? So you have to, you can't bank on, as you're doing this, thinking about your house is going to sell quickly. At the same time, you've got to be prepared for your exit strategy. If it does, what are you going to do? How are you going to get out of there? You can put in a contract, if it works, that it's, not just 30 days before they can take possession. You can put 60 days. You can put in, I want to be able to stay for 6 months and pay rent as long as I need to at this rate, right? Some people are fine with that. Other people are in the same boat you are. They've got to get out of their house because somebody else bought it and they're looking for your house and they'd like to move in yesterday.
Yeah.
And you've got to be aware of that too. But downsizing is one of those natural progressions I think people have of life. In my experience, the majority of people do end up downsizing their property. They just don't end up downsizing the cost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that I was going to share, is that downsizing for convenience makes a lot of sense, but to do it just to save money is probably not going to always be the best plan.
Yeah, and that's what you have to take with that. So we talked about the problem with having fixed expenses and inflation. If you haven't heard me talk about inflation, a good thing for you to get, it's free, is our Market Carver. It is where we do talk about the market, and it's either myself or our Chief Investment Officer, Adam Harder. He's a CFA. One of the two of us sends out a video every week where we explain what we believe are the most important. Economic and market. Do understand those are two different things. The economy and the market are not one and the same, but we'll give you what we think is the most important stuff. That is a freebie that comes out every Thursday morning. You can just go to our website at yourlifeafterwork.com, register for that. You'll also get our weekly newspaper column that we submit and send out on a weekly basis. It goes to the Anderson Herald, but it gets disseminated across the country. Used to show up in China. I always found that interesting, why people would want to know about U.S. tax code from an Anderson author in Indiana. 22 Chinese papers one day picked it up. I always found that fascinating. One of those stories that I get to tell my grandkids, I guess. Regardless, when you're looking at downsizing, it is one of those things that will happen, but make sure you make a list of all of the things to consider. Two of my favorite questions three actually, is what is the best that can happen from this? What is the worst that can happen? And can you live with the worst? And one of those things you really need to do is understand how you're going to communicate it to your children. I didn't do that, and that didn't go so well. Hey, thanks for joining Consider This.